On April 10th, 2020, my dad and I went to Austin, Texas to see the MotoGP race at COTA. We jumped on a plane, flew from Arizona all the way to Austin, rented a Tesla, and went to the race. This was our first time ever driving a Tesla, by the way, so that was an interesting experience. For one thing, this car is very high tech. For another thing, it's not actually that fun to drive. It's kind of like if you had an iPhone and you made it into a car, that's what the Tesla was like.
First Tesla launch ever. Ready, set, go. Not too bad. That's plenty fast. This isn't the fast one.
After testing out the acceleration capability, we of course had to go get some food, so we went to the local Pint House Pizza. We saw a cool Triumph car, I packed my camera gear, and we toured our hotel room. It was pretty hip. But we arrived on a Saturday and we needed something to do. So we drove to local small town of Barstow to check out the Painted Porch Bookshop. This is a bookshop that's owned by Ryan Holiday, who is a guy I look up to and whose books I've read. Almost all of his books, actually. For one thing, they had an entire fireplace literally made out of books. It was really intense. But the bookshop overall was super cool because it was like a collection of the greatest hits of books that I really like personally. There's a lot of self-improvement books, kind of philosophical books, historical books about people who did really awesome stuff. There was even a kids section. I think that if you're in the Austin area, the short drive over to Barstow is definitely worth it. And it's kind of a cool little town. We saw a new Lucid Air, which is like 1,000 horsepower, crazy electric car. And then we sought out a place for dinner. To decide where to go, we basically followed the local traffic. This one sleepy little corner of town had one restaurant in it, and everyone wanted to go there. So as we waited, we went on a little nature walk that was next to this river, going underneath bridges and just taking photos all along the way for funsies. We had a good dinner at this place. I bought a couple of books from Ryan's bookstore, of course. And then we just enjoyed the sunset. We got to sit way out on this cool patio that overlooked the whole park and the river and this little party happening down there with live music. It was gorgeous. So we just got to hang out and enjoy food and watch the sunset before the next day, which was race day. We woke up early and drove our Tesla to the racetrack and basically tried to get there as early as possible because we didn't know what the traffic and parking and all that situation would be like. And we were met with this jaw-dropping scene. I mean, this is an incredible facility, the Circuit of the Americas. I got to go kart racing first thing in the morning, which was pretty fun. Here's a little bit of footage of that. Obviously, my camera is way too shaky, but it was fun. I don't remember my exact lap time, but I'm pretty sure I was the fastest one in my heat. There was also only like 4 of us, so the competition wasn't exactly stiff, but I'm glad I got to have a little racing action of my own before we went and saw the races that day. Whenever you go to an event like this, there's the main event, but then there's tons of stuff that surround it. So there was all these vendors and other races going on, and just an incredible facility to go see in the meantime. I mean, COTA is a world-class racing track. This is no neighborhood, back street, little paved road. This is an incredible, incredible facility. So as we were looking around, we got to see these Moto 3 races taking off, and that's when we realized just how incredibly loud motorcycle racing is. There was just so much to do. I mean, you can sit and watch these other races. You can find a stunt rider like this guy who's doing crazy burnouts and one-handed wheelies and all kinds of stuff on a Harley, of all bikes, which is just incredible. You can go through and tour different vendor booths and see what kind of products that are new and that they're selling now. I mean, there's just endless things that you can try and do in an event like this. And so we tried to kind of touch it all, but I feel like you'd almost need to go back again just to see all the things that are there. Of course, Ducati owners got special treatment because this was a majorly Ducati-sponsored event. So there was this whole special parking area for Ducati bikes where they didn't have to pay. It was right there, like right next to the racetrack, which was really cool for them. And it was fun for the rest of us just to see these really awesome Italian racing machines. I mean, for one thing, the thing that stood out to me with these bikes is that there's not that big of a difference between a street bike that's performance-oriented and the race bikes. Obviously, they have to change a lot to do racing, but compared to the world of cars, which is what I'm more familiar with, this was just incredible. There's another thing you can do at the track. You could ride this little silly sling gondola thing up towards turn 1, but I'm sure it gave you a great view of the track. We didn't do that in particular, but we just walked around a bunch and walked about 10 miles that day to try and see everything possible. Then after a lot of waiting and just after lunch, it was finally time for the main event to get started. So there's this big hubbub down on the track as they get all the riders set up. They probably take a lot of pictures and get that kind of stuff ready. And what they're doing right now is staging all the riders down on the start line, and they get everybody all set up. They get them in the gear, they get everything ready, and then the race doesn't quite start yet. There's even more hubbub as people from the pits all come out, and they get to walk out there on the track and get everybody started. Now these guys have done kind of a warm-up lap as they've gone around, and so you get a little taste of what the difference is between those other motorcycle racing classes and the full-fat MotoGP. I mean, this is Formula One for motorcycles. This is the top. There is no higher racing level than MotoGP for road racing motorcycles. So it was pretty incredible to see just the fanfare and the hubbub around this whole thing. And it was a lot of waiting. Honestly, it felt like forever until the race was going to start because they kept sort of getting ready. They kept taking a warm-up lap here and there. And you'd see guys come around and sit. We had seats in the grandstand, and so it was an interesting experience because to see the whole race, you really had to look at this giant TV screen. You couldn't really see past maybe turn one and then the very last turn before the finish line again. And so you have this very limited view of the track when it comes down to it. But it was still fun, and it was a good learning experience. So now these guys have done an official warm-up lap, and they're actually staging in the grid to start for realsies this time. Here we go, time to start the race. And our seats were right in front of the finish line, so when they come around this last corner and cross the finish line, it was absolutely ear-splitting. After I found out our hearing could actually be saved by the free earplugs they had at customer service, we returned to just enjoy the race. And I had to do some crazy slow motion stuff here just to see what was happening because these guys are going by so fast, it's difficult to understand what all they're doing, their intentionality, their shifting, how much the wheelie control in the bike is electronically helping them to have the most grip possible coming out of these turns. It was incredible. And the fact that they're doing this for upwards of 45 minutes per race, this is such a physical sport. I mean, these guys are hanging off the bike in every single corner. Left, right, left, right. Their knees are touching the ground. Their elbows are touching the ground. And the forces on their body have to be just super intense. It wasn't a particularly cool day either, so the fact that they're doing all this wrapped in literal leathers is just nuts. I mean, these guys are athletes, period. Then we just got to settle into the race. I think we ended up with what were objectively good seats. It's just kind of funny because you pick the one area to view the race from, and then you're stuck there because you can't go, even though grandstands are kind of like the schnazziest seats you can get, you can't go over to some bleachers somewhere else and just sit there. Now, you could walk around and stand in the grass and do kind of a general admission viewpoint of the race, but you can't actually go and sit anywhere else on an official seating section, regardless of the ticket that you have. As far as I know, maybe there's some master key version of a ticket, but we also just didn't know what we were allowed to do, so we sat here and watched these guys just fly by for the next 40 minutes and saw some interesting things develop. For one thing, one of the race favorites, I think it's Marc Marquez, who just had some kind of issue whenever the initial start happened. They call him the King of Coda. He should have basically dominated everyone and won this race because he's so good at this particular track. He had an issue whenever they very first started that they think the bike kind of thought it was stuck in the pit lane, which means it was limited to 55 miles an hour. And you don't want that in the middle of a bike race. You don't need to be limited. But by the time they got it sorted out, he was in last place. I mean, it was literally 2 seconds of an issue, but that was long enough for the entire field to pass him. So a lot of the race was just watching him fight his way back, get through all the traffic, and prove that he really does have the most talent at this track and would have won, deserved to probably win, had he not had that issue. So it's kind of funny because this is an international racing series, but people know the series well enough and they know Marquez well enough that a lot of people were just cheering for him. I mean, he ended up in, I don't know if it was 4th place or 9th place. He ended up pretty far in the back, off the podium, but it was just that impressive to see him work his way through and just gobble people up all over the place in the turns and the straights. I mean, he was phenomenally skilled. And otherwise, I mean, it was a good race too. It's just a very different experience from watching a sport on TV because in one way it's so much more visceral. I mean, you're there, you get the feeling of the crowd, you physically feel the sound of the motorcycles in your chest because they're so loud. and at the same time you're almost disconnected in a way because you don't have those tight camera angles that the fancy cameras got the guy zoomed in, and you can see him dragging his knee on the ground and pulling a wheelie on his way out of the corner. Like, you just don't get that viewpoint in person. So it's kind of a trade-off. I mean, it's a hardcore thing for sure, and I think that we're really glad that we did it. But as we were wrapping up, we kind of decided that it'd be interesting to see a whole different sport at the same racetrack. Like, now we know the facility, we know the track. It'd be really cool to see an F1 race there. It'd be cool to see some other kind of race there, just because what else does that look like? I mean, now we get a sense of how fast bikes are there. What's an F1 car look like going down that front straight? You know, what's a normal car, like a fast street car, look like going down that straight? So one of my goals is actually to drive there myself. COTA is a top tier international track that's sanctioned for F1 and for MotoGP and all these high level things. But you can also just bring a normal car there. I mean, different sports clubs will rent it out for the weekend. You bring your own car, you drive it, you pay a few $100, and you get to be on the same track as these guys. I mean, how insane, how cool is that you get to be out there? So we just had a great time. We didn't drink enough water. We would do that differently next time. We would wear more sunscreen, bring bigger hats, basically not get toasted in the sun. But hard to complain when you get to watch these guys who are so tough and so focused and so impressive do this very physical activity right in front of you. You don't have any room to complain. And then the race was over. And it was also really cool to see these guys coming across the finish line and just see how big of a deal it was that they won, and see the reaction of their teammates. I mean, these guys are going crazy, hanging off the fence. They are basically trying to high five this guy as he crosses the finish line at 100 plus miles an hour. And just to see them celebrate that hard makes you understand how big of a deal this is and how much they really give to try and be the best, and to be as fast as they can, to be as efficient as they can, to do all these things they need to do in this super competitive environment. It was really cool to see that camaraderie. Then, out of curiosity, we may have snuck all the way across the entire racetrack to watch one of these other kind of lower races just play out from a different angle. I mean, this was a really cool spot. This was potentially our next favorite spot besides the grandstands, just because you get to see so many turns all in a row. And if you have to pick one spot to stay during an entire race, you may as well see more of the track. This was right at the end of the longest braking zone. And so these guys are upwards of 200 miles an hour coming into this tight little left, more than 90-degree turn. And so you got to see just how crazy their braking was and watch them dive in and try and pass each other and stuff. It was really, really cool. Got to take a few pictures with the camera as I was there, so I put some of my favorites here so you could see them. It's a spectacle. To go to a race like this, it is an experience, and I'm so glad we got to do it.